Well, to discuss the practical implications of this, Colonel Rich Outzen is a senior fellow at the Atlantic Council and Jamestown Foundation. He is joining us from Washington, D.C. Sir, thank you so much for joining us. Always a pleasure to have you on World DNA.
Good to be with you.
Now, sir, these are perhaps the strongest comments that we've heard from the United States side. There are real concerns, they say, around how certain supplies and systems are being used by Israel in its war in Gaza. How do you assess these statements?
Well, it's possible to read them at two different levels. On one level, some Israeli commentators have said, look, this is really a matter of where we set up the tents and when we set up the tents, and that the Democratic administration of President Biden is trying to appeal to its base by appearing to raise important humanitarian questions that actually don't impact the lives of Palestinians that much at all, which is not entirely untrue. But if you look a little deeper, there's a second level at which you can read this, which is frankly that, yes, it's about civilian suffering. It's about the length of the campaign. It's about how many more civilian deaths, along with whether Israel's actually going to achieve what it says it's trying to do, which is to get rid of Hamas. And at the end of the day, that's the real objection from Washington. That's the way I read this, which is that the lack of a political strategy for what happens after a Rafah operation is really what's at issue here. The Biden administration and many friends of Israel, and then I count myself as one of those, are wondering, if you go for a major operation in Rafah, that's fine, but what happens after? Who is left running Gaza if you get rid of all of the Hamas people? And again, Hamas, the United States recognizes as a terror organization, but the question is, what happens the day after? And there still has not been a credible plan for that. And many Israeli critics, as well as the Biden administration, are saying, please answer that question before you move to the next stage.
Right, Colonel Outzen, just to follow up on the point you made there, that there is no credible plan of the Rafah invasion and what happens after that. And US says, like you mentioned, that Israel lacks a credible plan. Do you reckon that this is a sign of growing differences between Israel and perhaps its strongest ally, the United States of America? And these differences between Washington, D.C. and Tel Aviv, what kind of bearing will that have on Israel's ground operations?
Well, this is certainly in the last 30 years the biggest gap, the biggest difference of opinion that the policy elites in Washington and Jerusalem have had. There's been differences over the peace process and the Oslo process and sort of the conduct of different Gaza operations. It's never come to this point, certainly since maybe the Reagan administration or perhaps George Herbert Walker Bush's administration. So we're talking 30, 35 years. This is a generational difference and tension between the two capitals. What does it mean? Well, it doesn't mean that the United States is going to punish Israel at this stage. I mean, certainly on both sides of the aisle, the Democrats and the Republicans both still are very much in favor of Israel's security and still feel a great affinity for Israel. But what it means is that Netanyahu has gotten Israel into a position of non-consultation or ineffective consultation with Washington to the point where we can't achieve a common strategy. That's highly unusual. I think what it means is that there's real question marks both in Israel and the United States about the course and the conduct of this war. It doesn't mean, again, that there's some shift in the essential support of the United States for Israel. I don't think that's what we're talking about. But it just raises the question mark that, since October, it's been 7 months now that we've been engaged in watching the conduct of this military operation in a very, very small territory, and there's still not a good political strategy for how it ends.
Right, Colonel Outzen, thank you so much for taking our time and joining us here on World DNA with your insights on this.
Thank you. Thank you.